Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk.
Another one?
Yet another one. Hundreds of the... hundreds of slices of quality.
Yes.
I'm Thos Ribbits.
Oh, sorry, and I'm Tim Sayward.
I'm
forget
sorry,
my name
you're
for the
Tim
moment.
Sayward too. Now, we're here today to be... Well, this episode is going to be subtitled Dial M for Merrily, Mormon and Moby. And we're going to be talking about three shows which you can see all start with the letter M, and there may be other M-related facts during the course of today's programme. So I thought we'd start, Tim, if that's okay, with a musical we saw together called Musical Husbands. Can you tell me about Musical Husbands?
Well, Musical Husbands, I found it a very light and rather over-commercial type of musical that just had sort of very traditional Broadway-type songs in it, and all in all was a bit of a sellout, I think, because the people who wrote it, this guy... Charles Kringus, started out and indeed has since gone on to significant success as a very serious playwright.
Left-leaning playwright as well.
Very much left-leaning, very political. But this, from the very early days of his partnership with Franklin Shepherd, basically comes across as a something they had to do to just sort of break out, really, to break through.
Well, you called it a sellout, didn't you? I mean, in some senses, it was a sellout both in the terms of actually against what they were trying to do.
Yes.
But of course, it did establish them as a big hit. So
It
it was a sellout in that sense as well, commercially.
It was their initial hit and a great success from which certainly Charles Kringus has gone on to a very impressive thing. Of course, Franklin Shepherd having then had the Hollywood career that.
Well, he married the leading lady as well. It's one of those relationships that sort of sometimes spring out of the hot house of musical theatre. Where people leave one person and go to the next one along. That happens quite a lot in acting. We've known it amongst several of our colleagues and friends.
It's a constant succession of opening doors, basically. I
wasn't going to be as vulgar as that. So, Musical Husbands, did we think it was worthwhile? And will it lead to anything? Does it? Do you feel that there's anything in it, or is it in anything?
Well, I mean, we know obviously that it has led places for the creators, and indeed the as you quite rightly pointed out, the leading lady. But as a piece in itself, just not that exciting, really.
No, funny enough, it really ties in with the context of the period, which is early 60s, which is, at that time, France seemed very fashionable, very hip.
Yes.
You'd had the big musicals, An American in Paris, which actually is late 40s, but then you'd had things like Daddy Longlegs,
right,
which was a reworking of an old Fred Astaire musical, and that was all... transported into Paris with Audrey Hepburn and Kay Thompson swirling around, and with new songs which actually weren't by... It's a Gershwin musical, reset with new songs, or some new songs, with Fred Astaire. So there is a long history of the Americans in particular finding France and Paris exotic and strange in a way that we just see
about
as
this sort of more
rude and cheese food.
Vulgar, exactly. And that sort of more uninhibited sexuality, which of course, one of the principal songs it deals with basically, and the relationships as well, doesn't it? So,
well, in a sense, it's the. I have to say, there's a very strong Protestant ethic in America meeting a Catholic ethic of France. So, as you say, that allows for a bit of friction in terms of sexual mores.
Exactly.
Well, if you're still with us, listener, you'll realise that we've just given you a very sincere review of Musical Husbands. Now, you may say, I've never heard of Musical Husbands, but the name Charlie Kringus and Franklin Shepherd are perhaps ringing a bell, and that's because they are the central characters, along with Mary Flynn, in Merrily We Roll Along by Stephen Sondheim, with a book by George Firth.
That's right.
And that's currently on in London with immensely good reviews. I mean, let's be brutal. It's got stars coming out of its fundament.
Let's not be brutal, because, yes, it has very good reviews, very well-deserved good reviews, I would say.
Up to a point,
and for those who don't know it, it's a backwards musical. It starts with the characters that we mentioned earlier, Franklin Shepherd and Charlie Kringus, and also Mary Flynn, in their middle age, and then
early middle age, actually. That's about 40, 41.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So, and we then see the progression of time backwards as they gradually undo their various successes that they've had, but also become a lot less bitter and a lot more hopeful. And we finally rendezvous with them at the beginning of in their college years.
Yes, their formation as a writing team and as a group of friends.
Yeah, the first time they meet, in fact, I think is what we actually is what we see. And it's great, actually, to do it that way. I think it's a fascinating way to sort of peel back the layers of a relationship.
I've got to ask this question, actually, because I don't think you can tackle Merrily We Roll Along without talking about the rewrite, because when it was originally written in the early 80s, 81, I think, it was a failure.
Yes.
It was, and there are various reasons for that, I understand. I mean, it's sometimes argued that it was a bit undercooked when how Prince directed it on stage in Broadway.
Yes.
And, of course, rolling backwards, unless you're making that very overt, which, of course, is in the text and the chorus numbers, but
people weren't following it. One of the reasons they may not have followed it at the beginning, although this is a much discussed thing, and obviously I never saw it at the time, so I don't know, but was that they did cast very young actors, which has tended to be the case since, actually, as well, with how it's done, but they were very young, and that, I think, made it harder for people to accept them in those initial scenes as much older than they actually were.
Which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute when we talk about this production that's currently on in London. But the original version starts with Franklin with the appearances of success.
Yes.
But actually it's very plain that it's not a real success. I mean, the original version, with a movie that bad, what on earth can you say? He's a producer of films.
That's right, yeah.
And it's an awful film, and they're only hangers-on and yes-men, and they're all being nice about him out to his face, and behind his back not.
Yep.
So his life is immediately shown to be empty and a failure, and then, as you say, you peel back to how he's lost all the supporting structures.
How did you get to go there from here, basically? Yes, exactly.
But then it goes all the way back, as you say, peels right back to their school, where the two fellas, who are the writing partnership, music and lyrics, Charlie and Frank, wrote the school song, which is Behold the Fields of Tomorrow, which, of course, is an aspirational song.
Of course.
And that's, as you say, it's the most perfect piece of idealism, and that's how they go, although the song is fairly dull, but, of course, it has to be. It's a school song. But then the very original version used to end by Franklin goes back to his school. So you go all the way back speech, and then comes back to real time now, and he does a speech to the pupils of his school as they are now. And in it, he realises his mistake and publicly pays tribute to Charlie Kringus, with whom he has previously, some years before, 7-8 years, fallen out in a massive, massive way. Yes, absolutely. And won't speak to in a very sort of aggressively no friends at all kind of way.
Yeah.
So you see, if not redemption, you see a kind of realisation, which presumably may or may not lead to redemption. Well, when I first knew the piece, Merrily, from the original recordings, I found that a very perfectly fine circle, and it made sense of a narrative going backwards. The new version, which was sort of recooked up in the 1990s,
92, yes,
in Britain, as it happens.
Yes, the Leicester Haymarket.
That's right, and that has been the standard text ever since. That removes, well, it changes the beginning and it changes the end. The beginning is a party in Frank's house after a film again, but there are no naysaying voices, although Frank does get a quick line about how he's dying inside. But we don't know if that's sincere or whether that's just part of his bitterness towards his then wife, or his attempt to curry favour with his new ingenue that he's trying to sleep with. And then it goes all the way back, and it ends with them on the rooftop in their apartment block where Charlie and Frank are living. And they meet Mary, who's the third friend in their circle of friends, or triangle of friends, as it drops off one by one. So that's their meeting point. And once again, in this version, Frank's got this thing where he shuts his eyes when he wants to remember something, so he's taking a mental photograph.
Right, yes.
And it ends with him taking that mental photograph. But it doesn't go back to the school, and it certainly doesn't come back to real time. So it is just a simple progression back. And if that's the case, if there isn't a loop, what is the benefit of doing it backwards?
I don't know. To me, it's something to do with the fact that the way that it unpeels the characters rather than from the outside. That's
rather than zips them up.
Yes, I suppose in a sense, yeah. To watch, I suppose you could watch it forwards, and I dare say somebody's probably produced it at some point experimentally and tried to see what happens if you do run it forwards rather than backwards.
A long roll Merrily.
Yes, that's right, exactly. And maybe it would work. I don't know, but I don't think it's ever harmed it, except in the sense that it may possibly have confused those audiences. And I think it's it just gives you a pleasant sensation. Basically, the way that a lot of drama is constructed is you plant things that then land later on, basically, don't you? Or you put them in, throw them into the air, I suppose. And there's a lot of that in this. So, for example, that thing, as you quite rightly mentioned, about him like closing his eyes to take a photograph, that's mentioned in the penultimate scene, and then you see sort of maybe the first time he did it, or and it tells you something about the character at that point. And I just know there's just a lot of irony laid over those early scenes that just wouldn't be present if that was when you were meeting the characters. There's a lot of poignancy in that final song, which is Our Time. It's actually a very slushy song indeed, certainly when listened to sort of out of context, but it does take on an ironic poignancy. thanks to being thanks to the fact that that their time is actually not going to be what they currently think it is by the end. So I quite like that about it.
Well, that does give a very good reason for why you should do it backwards. I mean, you're quite right. It just gives you the extra
layer
insight.
Of regret
that you wouldn't get if you were watching it in a normal chronological order.
Yeah.
But by contrast, then, do you have the problem whereby the initial scenes, which is Frank's later life, where it's already gone wrong, although he may or may not be aware of it, are they free of irony because we're taking it at face value? Do they lose something in the telling because
the risk
clues?
that takes is that they're not very nice people by the end, and of course the people you meet are people who are just being absolutely horrible to each other, and particularly Franklin Shepherd himself. And so, of course, it's quite difficult to make that initial investment, and it's only as you get towards the end of it that you kind of understand who these people were once upon a time, and perhaps you're more likely to identify with their younger, more idealistic selves. And also perhaps recognise that you yourself might be a little bit more older and no wiser, because that's kind of what we're led to feel about those characters. So I think it does get at that universal truth, but you're right, it takes a big risk at the beginning of basically. One of the places I think it picks up for a lot of people is in this. I think it's the second sort of phase, which has the number Franklin Shepherd Inc.
It's the first big blowout in a way.
Yes. It depicts Charlie Kringus, who was the playwright, who was this collaborator,
and friend
having a meltdown on TV in an interview where he publicly criticises his colleague, and basically that's the end of their songwriting relationship. In this very public interview, and it's a tour de force of a song, which often gets done in auditions. It requires immense speed and discipline from the performer, and involves you having to go mana 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 mana, yes Jerome, mana no Jerome, mana 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 mana, and all that sort of stuff.
It's a patter song, actually.
It is a patter song, and it's fantastic. And that, I think, grabs people's attention who might have sort of viewed it as basically a play at the beginning with a bit of singing around sort of the fact that they're going back in time.
I think we ought to say that you and I know the piece and have seen the piece before we went into it, so we know the narrative arc, so we were able to pick up all those clues and enjoy it for what it was. We went with two other people who hadn't seen it, weren't aware of it, and the view that they came away with was that they didn't engage with it and they didn't much like it and they weren't that impressed by it. Because, and am I right, you may wish to correct me here, but my understanding is because they did not like the characters, the very thing you were talking about. Whereas for us that didn't matter because we know what the characters are as we went in.
I remember the first time I saw it, which was in the late 90s at the Donmar Warehouse, maybe in just about 2000.
A very celebrated London revival.
And a fantastic show. And I don't recall particularly... the only thing that I think you get off the whole thing is just a thing you get off a lot of Sondheim, really, which is that it's a little bit smug. And I think it's thrown into quite sharp relief in this particular piece, along with company, because of the contemporaneity of it. They're like the sort of people you might meet nowadays who you might find a bit smug. And that can be a bit alienating as well, which you don't so much get with his more historical or, fantastical pieces.
I think we ought to say that we're a bit smug, so we're all right.
Yeah, exactly.
we enjoy
People
it.
Accuse me of being smug, but I say hooray for me.
People call me anal, so I made a big list of 10 reasons of why I'm not, and then I've made several copies for filing.
Yes, exactly. Was it exactly 10 reasons?
Oh, yes.
I trust, yes. So I can see why people don't take to the characters, especially if they're more musical fans who like sort of that ingenuous and the ingenue and
You mean traditional musical fans?
Yeah. They might find that actually they'd rather watch people who they like doing things. But I don't know, I quite like watching hateful people to make each other wretched.
Let us be careful here, though. So I think it's fair to say that Frank is hateful. But he's not deliberately hateful. He's very. I mean, he always says yes when he means no. He's got the will to be a better man.
Well, he hasn't
narcissistic, the wish, but he hasn't got the will. Actually, yes. He
basically wants to believe the myth that he created as a naive young man, really, doesn't he? He wants to sort of be the sort of all the success that he aspired to at that time. And unfortunately for him, he realises that it's a hollow success and that there isn't anything inside it. But he does achieve it.
But he's not simply a bad man. He's bad because he has no self-control, I think. What do you think of Charlie, who is actually...
well, he's the character of the three of them with supposedly the most integrity, because he does eventually go on to do the kind of writing that he plans to do. And
turn left.
Indeed. And which actually, frees him, as far as we can tell, as a character, though we don't actually see him at that point in his career, but... we just get introduced to him via someone making the faux pas of mentioning his name at this late stage of Franklin Shepherd's career. He is the character with the integrity. He is the sort of, the moral part of it. But he's also a little bit pie. He's a bit sort of, with it. He's a bit what's the word?
Sure. He's very sure of himself.
Yeah, he basically, he feels that he is the main one who's got the moral justice. He's a bit pompous.
He's a bit priggish as well.
Yeah.
And indeed, there is a song, isn't there, when, working backwards, Franklin has come back from a cruise after his first divorce.
Yes.
And he's just about to go off with the wife of his producer,
Gussie. That's right.
Gussit. And
is that her nickname?
he sings a song, just slightly odd. It's not a sort of melodious song where he's actually enumerating his close friends' failings as well as their
yes, that's right.
strengths.
Yeah.
And he does list a few things which are wrong with Charlie. And actually, I think he's right about that. Charlie isn't immediately likable. He may have integrity, but he isn't a very likable man.
No,
he certainly doesn't have. He's not a free and easy fella. What do you make of Mary then? Mary is identified as...
For me, she's the point of connection in the whole thing. She is the person I sympathise with, because I'm a drunken old soul. No, not because of that, but what she's doing in her function in the first scene, she's the forwards version of her career is that she again is an enthusiastic, bright-eyed student who's desperate to become a writer.
Me and Balzac.
Exactly, me and Balzac. Does become a writer and publishes, and then it goes wrong, doesn't it, for her? And she becomes increasingly...
That's she becomes a critic, which in theatre terms is failure.
It's definitely failure. And for a lot of the years of her career, spends a lot of time sort of trying to get back from writing for women's magazines or whatever to being a novelist. But she does write the book in the end, doesn't she?
Yeah, the book is published because he picks her up a foreign translation edition when he's on his cruise.
That's exactly it, of course. And but then a bitterness settles over her, basically, that goes with sort of having given one's all and the world having sort of reacted with a bit of a yawn,
well, also she's in love with Franklin, but it's an absolutely unrequited love.
Absolutely,
which is one of the reasons she hangs around him, even though she's fallen into alcoholism in her later life,
and indeed a good deal of cynicism about who he is as a person, which is where we meet her. We see her at that point.
Well, we meet her at her breach. This party at the beginning is actually when she leaves his life.
Yes.
It's also about the point when his second wife's about to leave him as well.
Yes.
It's not a good party.
No.
But actually, is she likeable?
That's why I don't like parties.
But what? Because your second wife will leave you.
I know.
You've got to meet
every single time Every single time I've been to a party, that's happened to me.
There's nothing so frightening as the joke, "You look like my first wife." How many times have you been married? Never.
Yes.
But is Mary sympathetic? Because as you say, by the end, she breaks free.
If you relish that kind of
and...
character, if you like Betty Davis, then why wouldn't you like Mary? I mean, it's that sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, but you like Betty Davis because you don't like the Betty Davis in Betty Davis. You like the image of Betty Davis. So
yes.
You like the cynical wisecracking.
Well,
in this case.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that she can wisecrack, the fact that she's standing outside of it all, and the fact that she's because you might watch this party scene and think, God, these are a load of sort of up themselves smug gits, basically.
Yeah,
and she's the person pointing that out.
Yeah,
so she is a point of connection, I think, for the audience at that point. And in fact, she turns out to have been the one who's all the way through been, I suppose, least like the most blameless, perhaps, of all of them as well.
The least self-centered, actually.
Yes.
In fact, completely self-centered because she's been in love with him and forgiven him a lot, Franklin. Yeah. And she has tried to keep the group of three.
She's the bridge between the two friends who eventually snaps.
Yeah. Ironically, as you pointed out for Charlie and Franklin breaking up as collaborators and indeed friends in real life and indeed having any contact turns out to be the redemptive moment for Charlie. So he goes off to do what he actually did want to do.
Yeah.
We wonder if by Mary finally walking out of Franklin's life at this point, this is the cure of her love for him.
Yeah,
and could this actually be redemptive for her? We never see that.
We don't know. Yeah, we don't know. We don't. And also, there is equally the possibility that really she just feels like she's had it.
Well, we've never had a sequel, which if it's called At Mary's Funeral, we know it didn't go well. But if it's called Mary's Queen of the World... If you did it
as a sequel, would you start from the end or the beginning again? I mean, what would you...
I think you'd have to go after.
Because
at the beginning, it would be a children's show. Franklin and
No, I didn't mean that. I meant would the sequel run backwards or run forwards?
I see. You mean would it be 70 to 40?
Would it start from
in
the end of their
age?
lives and run to the back to the middle, or what?
Now that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Is George Forth listening?
I don't know.
George! We've just copyrighted that idea.
Yeah, exactly. Written expression. Okay, as to the production, I enjoyed it a lot, but I didn't enjoy it quite as much as when I first saw it.
I agree with you. I didn't see the Don Mar. I saw the Don Mar concert revival, which they did recently with the same cast.
Right, okay.
And this was good. But we both came out of it thinking it was a little bit... This is an odd thing to say about a piece of theatre, but a bit theatrical.
Yes, a little bit, yeah. It felt a little bit like it just had imbibed a little bit too much of the Broadway style of doing things and perhaps not enough of the more playwrighty way. Basically, a little bit too much Shepherd and not quite enough Kringus, actually, was probably how I'd put it.
There were a few cheap laughs as well. So, for example, immediately after the interview on television where Charlie and Frank break up, essentially.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
The TV presenter... once the camera is off and she sarcastically thanks them, she wanders off, and then you hear her when she's off stage shouting, "Jesus Christ!" Yeah,
which just isn't necessary.
Well, it got a big laugh, but you're right, it actually undercut the moment. What it did, it got to put a laugh in where you didn't want to laugh. You actually wanted to be able to dwell on the moment of actually one of the saddest things in anyone's life, which is the loss of a long-term important friend.
Yeah,
I think.
No, I think it did, and there was a slightly greater feeling of the thing being held back a little bit as well. So I think that there was, interestingly, in the performances, I think certainly the previous version I've seen, and certainly the recording everyone knows of Franklin Shepherd Inc., it just really goes all out. You know, it's
the original one, the Jim Zine version,
bravura sort of performance, if you like, and there was a little less of that in this, interestingly, which is kind of the opposite of what we said, isn't it? Less Broadway and more serious, legit theatre. I wondered if it was completely correctly cast. Jenna Russell, for me, as Mary Flynn, wasn't the right casting, and I would.
I liked her more than you did. So what didn't you find worked?
I don't know. It was just something about the way that you were able to believe her as that type of character. That's probably as articulate as I can be about it, but I just didn't feel... I saw her as Dot in Sunday in the Park with George, which they did at the Miniature Chocolate Factory, which was the Sam Budnock production, and fantastic. I mean, perfectly
it's not a question of her acting, is it?
No. But in this, I wasn't sure that she was the person I was hoping Mary would be.
I would agree with you to one degree. I thought she made a fine sardonic, bitter drunk, but I thought she was a little too cheerful a cynic. If that makes sense. She was a little too comic as a cynic, rather than hangdog almost, which by that stage I think you've really got to get.
Yes, you need to feel like this is someone who really has smoked 40 Golwazes a day for some years, you know. I mean, that would... Put
them out with whiskey.
Yes.
I agree with that. The thing is, I think she has... Of the three main characters, as we've already said, she is the one that you naturally gravitate towards as a person. And I think in that sense you can connect with Jenna Russell. So I think that it was successful as a link in for the audience.
Yes.
But whether that's the right, as you say, whether that's the right way of interpreting the character.
And then Mark Umbers and Damien Humbly as Franklin Shepherd and Charlie Kringus, and respectively, I should say, who I thought did it well. Again, not quite as good as the first time I saw it.
Can I say something about
Glenn
Mark
Kerslake was very good, though, as Joe Josephson. I liked him a lot.
Yes, because he had to do the thing from being bolshy producer all the way down to actually sort of...
Yes.
Not just broken husband, but pathetic broken husband.
Yes, yeah. No.
Asking for handouts. I want to say something about Mark Umbers, who's Franklin Shepherd. Very handsome man.
Yes.
Sings very nicely.
Yes.
And actually, I think there was more to his performance than at first appeared, because it's very interesting. In Act 1, when he's 40 and going back through his 30s, he's trying to play a man much older than himself. And we've touched upon this at the very beginning. It's quite difficult to do. And unfortunately, he had adopted a certain pose. He had a very, very obvious pose, which he sort of flung his shoulders back and stood very upright. But unfortunately, it worked against physicality of his character. Now, I don't know if we're supposed to draw from that character that he's lost his enthusiasm and therefore he's stiffened up a bit. But he looked a little bit like, and I don't mean this as a cheap criticism, but he looked like a doll which had been placed in various poses. And so much so, in the interval, we heard several people mentioning it, that he had this very distinctive pose.
Yeah.
And it sort of was working, it made him stiff and non-active. The reason I wonder if that's an acting choice rather than a lack of choice at all is because in the second act, when of course he's much younger, it was very clear to me that he was a
double up.
very much more physical character. He was he had the exuberance of youth and the physicality of youth and that kind of sort of fidgetiness actually that sometimes you get when you're young.
Yeah.
I thought, well, here's a man who's actually using his body to build his youthful character.
It is a great acting challenge, really, isn't it? The whole business of because I mean the distinctions are subtle between sort of 20 and 40. I mean it's not it's not wave the bus pass and
I've just crossed the 40 barrier. I tell you it isn't.
No, exactly. They're quite subtle things, and I don't know exactly what they are and how a person captures them. But
well, in my case, you take your hair off.
but it's easy to stereotype, them, and they certainly avoided that, of course. It's difficult to know what exactly it is that tells you what conveys that information, because most of how you read a person's age is physiognomic and to do with the size of their head in relation to the rest of their body and all that sort of stuff. And and so not saying that an actor can easily fake.
Also, it has to be said the relationship between clothes and the body, because obviously you do naturally get bigger as you get older.
Yes, that's true.
And you tend to wear slightly more comfortable clothing. It's an odd thing, and he was actually, but of course he's a success, so he's wearing smart clothing, and of course smart clothing is designed to emphasise the figure, so it works against what you might actually do in real life to make an older person. It is a hard thing to do. To be 40 when you're not.
It is. It's
in
true.
Both directions.
Although I seem to manage it for most of my life, but there we are. Okay. All in all, it was an enjoyable experience to see the thing again, and I liked it more on second viewing, which I wasn't necessarily expecting to, because when I saw it before, I was much younger myself, and if you could flash back to that moment
true of
now,
everything you saw before, though.
I suppose it is, but not much younger necessarily.
Yes.
At the time, more naive, and I hadn't really heard much Sondheim. I think it may have been the first Sondheim I saw in the theatre. I can't remember, it had much, perhaps stronger impression on me at the time than perhaps it did this time around. But actually, I felt as a script and as a concept, I still like it.
I wanted to make, before we move off it, there's a couple of things I want to mention. The first is there's a song you said in the before it started, but you particularly wanted to see and hear again because it's your favourite, and it's actually one of my favourites from the show, which is The Blob.
The Blob, yes. Meet the Blob.
The people you talk about, or whatever it is, isn't it? Yes,
that's right.
Anyway, they are the movers and shakers in the 60s.
They are the movers, they're the shapers, they're the names in tomorrow. Shapers, not shakers.
That's right, yes.
They're names in tomorrow's papers. And
these are the people who give you vapours, which actually isn't from that song, it's from later on, isn't it?
Oh, that's right.
That's a clever piece of...
they're the most important people in the most important city in the most important country in the you-know-what.
They are indeed.
I do like that.
Except I don't believe that's true. But funny enough, you do get these perfect parallels with the party you start the thing with in 1981, because they're also full of movers and shakers, except they're all vacuous, pointless people, in fact.
Yes.
But at that stage, you're supposed to not be impressed by them, but whereas when you're on your way up, they were impressed by them in the 60s.
That's right.
So that song in itself is good and enjoyable. What I have to say, we started this with a mock series review of Musical Husbands, which is the commercial show that really makes Frank and Charlie's name for Joe Josephson. It's rubbish, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is. It's actually, I think it's one of the weakest things in the whole show.
Yes, I think that's 100% intentional, of course.
Yes.
But the whole of their musical theatre writing career is actually summed up in a leitmotif that that Sondheim writes as the sort of signal for "This is music written by Franklin Shepherd," ba 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 bum, which is the tune for it started out with like a song, and then earlier on, of course, becomes Who Wants to Live in New York. And my favourite thing about that particular leitmotif, and I assume this was intentional, was that it harks strongly back to the leitmotif for Rose in Gypsy. I had a dream, a wonderful dream. Same melodic contour.
You're right.
And
with his lyric, of course.
With, of course, Sondheim worked on it. So I did wonder if this is him sort of signalling conventional musical theatre can be summed up by this little musical reference to this thing that Julie Stein wrote, because Julie Stein, arch Broadway insider.
Yes.
And
from Bethnal Green.
I wonder if Sondheim, although Sondheim didn't write the book, Sondheim is a Charlie Kringer's character, right?
Oh, crikey, yes.
Of the two of them, that's who he is. He's not Franklin Shepherd.
Pardon me, have you sold out, Mr. Sondheim, or are you perhaps full of integrity? What's your view?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's sort of that's his little bit of contempt. Not that he would necessarily have contempt for the thing that he worked on, Gypsy, but he would certainly categorise that in a particular sort of area of the theatre.
That is a remarkable observation, and I've never heard it before.
Well, there you go. I've been dying to say it for years. But anyway, yeah. So that's really all you hear of their work, which is because even the musical Husbands finale, I think, makes some use of it as well, and that's the only other thing you hear of their work as well. But clearly, it's part of a very small cell of music in the whole structure of the score. And yeah, you're right, it's rubbish.
It is. I'll tell you what, and you get odd resonances as well. And have you ever seen The Drowsy Chaperone? Yes.
No, I haven't, actually.
Oh, have you not?
No.
Well, Drowsy Chaperone starts Act 2 with a musical.
That's right, yeah.
By accident put on the record player, in this case by the listener, the narrator character. And it's the same position in the play, obviously for a totally different reason. In this, you open Act 2 with a totally different show to the one you've actually been watching. It's the show within the show. And my goodness, it's a hackneyed old piece of trash.
Yeah. The other thing I really like about the stuff that they write early on is that he does manage to make the lyrics not be quite as good as his own normal lyrics. So who wants to live in New York? Who wants to the noise, the hustle, and the scansion's a little bit off, and there's too many consonants sort of, crammed
And he even
into
talks
line.
about fixing a line he doesn't like. I'll fix that later.
Yeah, exactly.
They're always blowing their cork. I'll fix that line.
I'll fix that later, yeah, exactly. They're always popping the cork.
Is that right? Yes.
Yeah. Yes, that is... Yes, that would be... I don't know how he did it. Maybe he just sort of wrote it in 20 minutes flat and just sort of accepted whatever came out instead of doing what he normally would do and polish it.
It would be interesting to know, and unfortunately his books don't tell us this. Although his 2 books of lyrics tell us a lot, I think they're also remarkable for what they don't tell you.
Yes.
Interestingly. They also aren't very good at picking up his occasional flaws.
Yes.
They're very good at picking up everyone else's flaws, but they're not
Indeed.
that good at picking up his own, unfortunately. But we'll discuss that on another programme.
Indeed, we will.
So that's M1
Yes,
to the
indeed.
north.
Where should we go
Scratchwood
next?
Services. Well, I think that you've been to see a show that also...
I have been to see a show.
Yes.
Well done, you.
Me, it's quite... You're exactly the man, therefore I need to have on this programme.
Good.
No, you went to see the Book of Mormon, for
I
which
did.
we're going to call Mormon,
really
the book of, in order to make it
Yes,
start with
I
M.
was going to say, it's a B, really, isn't it? But there we are. It's a pure contrivance anyway, isn't it? The Book of
How
Mormon.
dare you! I have spent 20 years dreaming for this eclipse
Yes.
and conjunction of shows.
Well, I just want to say Hasadiga Ibawai before we get started, but I'll explain why shortly.
Yes, but I hope you shall. Now, the Book of Mormon, it's a musical that's opened in London just recently. It's had a tremendously long build-up. It's been advertising since last autumn. So much so.
Well, it took a little bit of the path of Avenue Q, I suppose, which was a slow burn, but definitely a success on Broadway. It opened off Broadway or on Broadway about 2004-ish, having had a successful off-Broadway run, and then it took until 2006 before that actually transferred across the Atlantic, basically, to us. In other words, the producers wanted to be really sure that they had a surefire thing going before they... Because it was a bit of a risk, and it wasn't something that had really been done on the musical stage of London before, arguably, except on the Fringe. And this sort of did something similar in as much as it gathered steam, and an enormous amount of it, because I was in New York last year, and it was one of the shows, one of the main shows that you really there was no hope in getting a ticket for it at all unless you went in for the lottery.
About it, weren't they? People evangelical about Mormons.
Yes, I mean you just couldn't get tickets for it, and they were very expensive even if you could. So I didn't get to see it on that occasion, and it was of course very topical as well, because they, whether cannily or intentionally, I don't know, but it had gone on, in the run-up to the presidential election at that time, which of course featured the first major party platform Mormon candidate, and so it sort of had that topicality. And of course, a lot of the people who'd be going to see this show would probably be Democrats anyway, and would be quite happy to see that sort of thing mocked. Anyway, over it has just come, and it's retained. To the best of my knowledge, because I didn't see it in New York, but it's certainly retained a lot of the charm that I've heard on the album, certainly, and it was a really polished piece of
In terms of how it was advertised here, though, as I say, it was it took a long time. Last autumn is when the advertisement started appearing on the tube, everywhere on the tube, and I remember talking to people who weren't particularly interested in musical theatre in the same way we were, but saying, I want to go and see this.
Yeah.
And then you said, well, it's not actually open yet. It doesn't open until next spring.
Yes.
And they said, but it's advertised everywhere. I think people were misunderstanding, but it had its effect. It lodged it in the brain for long enough for then people to, when they hear of it again, think, oh, I want to see that.
Yes.
So that's quite clever. That's a long term.
Well, of course, it would have been expensive to
Yeah.
do, but yes, they obviously felt that if they didn't sort of get people booking early,
Yeah.
then they weren't going to be able to assess their risk very well. And it's obviously a big theatre that it's in, the one that had Mamma Mia in it until recently.
And in a minute we'll talk about what it's about, but let's just talk contextually. In Britain, we don't have a strong... I mean, there are Mormons, and we're aware of
Yes,
American
the Mormons
coming
themselves
over.
have actually recently launched a big advertising campaign in London.
On the back of it.
Pretty much on the, I suspect, in reaction to the existence of that show.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
But we don't have a huge history of Mormonism in this country.
No,
we know of it as an American religion. We occasionally meet the well-dressed young men who pray for you in your living room if you let them in.
We have Jehovah's Witnesses here, which is of course a bigger deal. And
more Jehovah's Witnesses than we do.
Yes,
yeah.
and of course people will know the basic routine of the doorbell and the discussion.
Door-to-door evangelism.
Yes, so it's not that unfamiliar a concept in that sense. But of course, the show itself is not about that anyway. That's merely the opening number. The show is about a mission in Africa. Of a Mormon church, which of course could be any,
which of
almost
course we
any
do
church
have
in
a
that
big
way.
history of missionaryism in this country, although mostly from the Victorian era.
Yes.
So yes, in that sense, I believe that's true. So shall we talk about the piece? Now, I want to tell you, I got an impression of it, because I haven't seen it, and I'm not interested in seeing it. And I'm going to be honest with you immediately. I shall lay my cards on the table. The reason I'm not interested in it is twofold. The first is that what has come to my ears, and what I understand it to be, is in fact puerile, and you may want to correct me here, and there's a difference between puerile and silly. I am the first in the queue for silly. I adore silliness. I'm a great fan of the Goodies and things like that, and to an extent Monty Python, all of which specialise in silliness. And silliness does not, I think, preclude wit and intelligence. It's just silly,
right.
But it has all those things in it. I think it's very difficult to be witty and intelligent and puerile. So that's how I'm differentiating that.
Well,
and can I just say the second thing,
that
the reason I'm not particularly interested in it is because there's also just enough resonance that's coming out of it of slightly discomfort-making racism.
Yes,
or at least cultural racism.
Yeah,
so I wonder if you might care to comment on those and tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, I'm not necessarily going to tell you you're completely wrong on the second one. The puerility, I don't necessarily subscribe to your sort of general theory of that there's that strong a distinction between silliness and puerility. I mean, I found Jerry Springer puerile and witty, and did manage to do both of those things. And I think that's fine, and that's just a matter of taste, I think, more than anything else. And I would agree that this falls absolutely into that same bracket. It did remind me a lot of Jerry Springer, and of course Jerry Springer in turn reminded me of South Park, which of course was the creation of these guys who've written the Book of Mormon, and also Bobby Lopez, of course, who was involved in Avenue Q.
You see, I like to put my cards on the table. South Park the musical, South Park the film, I think is actually one of the great musical films of the last 20 years.
Right, well, and also extremely puerile.
But I don't think it is. No, I'm not sure it is. I think it's satirical. I'm not sure I get puerile out of it.
Okay.
Because puerile is just sort of unnecessary fart gags. Let's be honest. And not just... There's more to it than that.
Is there such a thing as an unnecessary fart gag?
Yeah, all of them.
Surely, extremely essential. Well, I don't know. I think it's a matter of taste, and I think actually this isn't that.
Not the word I'd use immediately after fart gag.
No, that's true. Well, a matter of bad taste. And in fact, I think if you sat this side by side with South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, I mean, come on, puerile joke or what? Surely.
But
if you put it alongside with them, I think I find them of much the same character.
Do you? Right, okay.
What this has. And they both sort of treat of theology and other things as well.
They ring your particular bells on that.
They do, and they've certainly. I mean, they've made a significant career out of mocking religion, among many other sort of shibboleths, but certainly mocking religion and Scientology and all of those things.
Well, you like taboo busting anyway, which is one of the reasons you like Jerry Springer. Funny enough, I wouldn't call Jerry Springer puerile. It's not my taste at all, but I would call it puerile.
Oh, okay. Well, Richard Thomas will be very glad to hear that, I'm sure.
I shall let him know.
Do, yes.
But whereas I can see the similarity is taboo busting, and I know you're a great fan of taboo busting, but the problem with taboo busting sometimes is that you put your size 8 feet right in the middle of it, and you sometimes miss the point. But
yes, and I think you could accuse South Park, for example, in the past. So let's just get onto this. So
on the Mormon.
Yes. Who is it aimed at, and what is the satire? One might ask.
Well, I will then. Who is it aimed at,
and what is the satire? Thank you very much for the asking. It's aimed at Christians, and it's by which I mean it is aimed at satirising Christians, not Mormons. It uses
when you say aimed at, you mean as in an attack, rather?
Yes,
than,
I think so. I think so.
Although
interestingly, and very much like Avenue Q, it does end up pulling its punch, and I'll come on to that later on. But where they satirise Mormonism for the sort of slightly odd beliefs that it involves, they do so in the context of a song where he says, you can't just take a little bit of it, you have to accept it all. And the structure of that song it's called I Believe, so it's it's quite literally a credo song. And he says, I believe that, God is the one and only God, and I'm paraphrasing here, which of course is a Jewish belief originally, and then I believe that Christ was his only son sent to save us, which of course is the Christian additive to the basic Jewish tenet, and then I believe that God and Jesus both have their own planets in with the following name, which is a Mormon belief and part of the Third Testament. That's
Old
right.
Testament,
Yes,
Testament,
that's what they are.
Even Newer Testament than that.
And by everybody who's a Christian laughing at the third one about the planets and all that sort of stuff, which seems patently absurd, they're being invited to consider what
1 and 2 mean.
One and 2 actually should mean. So that's what I think it's targeted at. I think it's targeted at mainstream Christianity, and it uses Mormonism as a sort of out there way of quite literally satirising it, i.e. by taking the reductio ad absurdum, or treating Mormonism as the reductio ad absurdum of Christianity. So I think that's partly where it's at. It also sort of mocks the naivety of religious views, and that song Hasidiga Ibawai, where they turn up.
The magical word that you said.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it translates as the guy who the Ugandan guy who said it's basically a version of Hakuna Matata. This musical knows its musicals very well, and so they have this phrase Hasidiga Ibawai if something goes wrong. Hasidiga Ibawai, and
isn't that K Sarah Sarah?
What does that mean? Asks Elder Cunningham, one of the Mormon recruits. No worries for the rest of your life, for example. And the guy says, no, Ibawai means God, and Hasidiga means fuck you. So I suppose put together it would mean fuck you, God, which they then proceed to pronounce many, many, many times throughout the course of that song.
Much to the discomfort of the Mormon characters, presumably.
Yes, of course. Yes, I mean that's what it's there for. And it's confronting them with the sort of their notions that a prayer can be answered, and with copious evidence that if they are being answered, it ain't in Uganda, it's somewhere else, because everybody has AIDS, and and they manage to make you laugh at that, and that I think is where some of this discomfort about the racial stereotyping might come in at this point. I think because I don't know, I'm just getting too old or whatever, but there were moments where the characters play up to the stereotype that you get from, for example, The Lion King, of the sort of happy African tribesman, basically. And there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of that in the show, and it is discomforting because you think, God, this is sort of minstrelsy. I wonder how the performers feel about this, and so there is a strong element of that, and I ended up not feeling quite sure, because it's certainly for satirical intent, but I do wonder if irony is always the only, is an excuse for that sort of thing.
Well, can we just talk briefly, because they have got form, the writers here, in the Team America, which starts off banging liberal credentials, but by the end is very anti-liberal. And you might say, well, hang on a minute, they take prisoners.
They're anti-everyone. I mean, that's sort of how they...
But then if you're anti-everyone, what point are you making?
Yes.
And if you're not making a point, then you fall into the category of actually not making a point, which is
the point that this musical ends up making, because they... for those who don't know the story, 2 missionaries go off to Africa, to Uganda. One of them's a bit of a fibber. One of them's the sort of chosen one, the one who's definitely going to make a real boy, most likely to succeed. And the other one's a sort of
the American
spot
ideal dream
who just who basically is sort of obsessed with Star Wars and is a complete geek. And
he's also
inevitably,
but he's fat and lumpy, isn't he?
Yes, that's right. And inevitably, he's the one who has the success by actually getting the very first recruits for the Mormon Church in Uganda, which he does by unfortunately making up a whole load of stuff, because he's never really properly read the Book of Mormon himself, that they then
buy.
Present back in a sequence directly inspired by The King and I, the Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin sequence, which gets presented back to the elders of the Mormon Church who come over to see how they're doing, basically. And all of I won't spoil the extremely pleasant surprises of the sheer just awfulness of what he puts into this story, but it does shock the elders. But at the very end, again, without giving away the ending, there's a sort of moral that suggests, well, so long as people believe what makes them happy, it's all good. And that's where the punch gets pulled. Because if you spend the entire show satirising people's religious beliefs, to kind of end it on that note is a slightly surprising direction.
Although immensely patronising in its own way, actually, I may say.
Well, I mean, pretty much something to offend everybody, really, because...
but then it doesn't have a point.
But yes, that's right. And I wonder if that was just the influence of the... I don't know. I don't really know whether they wanted to lift it at the end or something like that.
Or retain their commercial nature.
Yeah, I think possibly something. So that's where I found the compromise. And I found a similar compromise in Avenue Q, where basically they sort of enjoy saying dirty words and the internet is for porn and stuff like that, but it's a really conservative and conventional story. Ultimately.
Well, I think when it boils down, it's boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy meets girl again, or does she?
Yes, that's right. But not just that, it also sort of reifies the idea that you can do some good in the world, you know, when it starts off on the premise that you damn well can't. So I
is
don't know.
anyone improved by the text within the narrative?
Yes, I would say so.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I think so. So it follows that, and it's very much a traditional musical that just has, again, a lot of swear words, very much like Avenue Q, in that respect. But I enjoyed it all the same.
Score pastiche or
the score is largely pastiche, consisting of, I mentioned Hasidic Evil Eye, which is basically a pastiche of Hakuna Matata. You've got a song called I Believe, which I don't know what exactly it's a pastiche of, but it sounds awfully like it's one of something.
Well, there is a song called I Believe, isn't there? I believe that every...
Yes, it's not like that, no. It's a much more sort of Disney power song. A lot of it is Disney, really. I mean, that's basically what we're getting. Like Alan Menken is being significantly ripped off.
Well, what I'm hearing is Lion King.
I say ripped off, of course, for the purposes of my lawyer. I don't mean ripped off. I mean paid homage to.
But Lion King sounds like it's.
The Lion King is present, although
not.
I mean, there's a whole little sequence where they do a dummy. They do a bit like in the Dread Shepherd. A sort of African tribal character, but with a tiger sort of apron, comes on and does that whole thing that you get from that character at the beginning of The Lion King, and then they sort of cut back to the airport. It's just like, so and so has done this presentation for you, and it turns out entirely inauthentic. Yes. But yeah, what else have we got in there? We've got things like Man Up, which is a sort of, again, rock power type of song. Stuff that you'd be very familiar with if you'd seen South Park, Bigger, Longer and Uncut.
I've got to ask you this question, because it will become apparent in the next one we discuss. Are there any British characters in it? Bearing in mind there's already missionaries in Africa and things like that. I only ask because I want to know if there had been, whether they would have been introduced with a Gilbert and Sullivan number. Because as you'll see later on, you'll understand why I ask.
It's not quite that crude. One of the songs I really like in it is called Turn It Off, I think it's called. And I'll give you a flavour of it by the basic sort of hook of the song is turn it off like a light switch, just go click. It's a cute little Mormon trick, and they're talking about emotions basically. So they're saying like, that each of them has their story about the one who sort of realised that he was in love with the other Mormon boy and that sort of thing. And the trick that they all do is just turn it off like a light switch, just go click. It's a cute little Mormon trick. And it's a nice, subtle song in the midst. Well, subtle for this musical, in the midst of the thing, and it turns into a big tap number. And they even the lights go out, like so you don't actually see the big like tapping routine.
Yes. So cheap to stage then.
Which I think is witty. I think that falls under. It's puerile and witty, both at the same time.
Is it puerile?
Well,
why is that puerile?
Because it's sort of. Well, no, you're right. Perhaps it is just silly. Yeah. They. I don't know, it just sort of tweaks the nose of the musical a little bit. But at the same time, of course, the audience I was there with a lot of gay humanists, basically. So the people very much who this sort of thing is aimed at. And they were getting huge laughs from all of the sort of jokes at the expense of the religions. And yet this classic tap number in big sequiny waistcoats with slightly camp young men comes up. and the audience, straight, gay, whoever, absolutely lapping it up as if it was like Frank Sinatra and they were from the 30s. And that was interesting, I think.
Yeah, because Frank Sinatra's not really a 30s singer. He's a 50s singer.
Of course, I mean Fred Astaire, don't I? Yes.
Yes. But we'll forgive you that slip. Yes,
yes please.
But I know what you mean. Were there any moments then your lovely audience didn't like any elements of it? Were there moments when you suddenly got that slight buttock clenching?
No, actually, oddly, no. I mean,
you were unclenched through it.
Judging by I've mentioned a couple of times, I was like, these seem to me like racist caricatures sometimes of the African characters, of the Ugandan characters, and but I didn't really detect a significant and maybe it's just white liberal guilt, and maybe no one cares. I don't know.
Well, I haven't seen it, and I care, so that's why I asked. But
but you need to see it to know if you really should care. And
I agree with that.
Yeah. So, there was that aspect of it. But as I say, it worked. The thing worked. What else is in there that's good fun? They have this spooky Mormon hell dream, which is basically the Dream Valley in the second half. So it's structured exactly classically for a sort of trad Hollywood musical. The one thing it doesn't have, although it sort of does, is it doesn't have a conventional love story. So the main character really is in love with himself, and he doesn't. There isn't a girl for him to get, or rather, there is a girl that he could get, but in fact, it's actually the secondary. In the very conventional Hollywood structure, you have a main couple, and you have a secondary couple, and in fact, what you have is the main guy, the comedy sidekick as well, but it's the comedy sidekick who actually gets the beautiful girl. In this particular subversion of the genre. How do they dare?
Any gay characters?
Apart from the one who was suppressing it in no.
My question about this is of a similar nature to my view on Avenue Q. I went to see Avenue Q and I enjoyed it, but I very quickly realised that Avenue Q is a show you can only see once.
Yes.
Because it has nothing to offer you on a second viewing. What is your view of this?
I think you could watch it twice, but probably I would leave it at that. It does pull its punch a little bit in the same way that Avenue Q does at the end, and that actually Jerry Springer does as well, because of they sort of end up with this vague hand-wavy thing about energy as pure delight and nothing is wrong and nothing is right and all the rest of it, which
undercuts any satire.
Which sort of undercuts the satire a little bit. Yeah. And this has that same issue, but it's enjoyable in and of itself, in the way that Hairspray is enjoyable in and of itself, or Grease is enjoyable in and of itself. You don't.
So any other hair product.
Yes, basically. And it's interesting actually that, like Grease, and actually like Hairspray, it's one of those musicals of groups. So in Grease, the groups are the boys and the girls, and they must, and through the course of the drama, they must eventually create some understanding between them, basically, or the farmer and the cowman in Oklahoma. It's one of those sort of groups music. And in this case, it's the two significant groups are the white Mormons and the black Ugandans, and they have to find...
West Africa side story.
Yes, exactly. Yes, although it's East Africa, but
I know, but it didn't look.
Yes, indeed. There's a great number, and I think this is one of the things that sort of eased my worries about the what I thought was the minstrelsy part of it, which was it's called I Am Africa, and it's sung entirely by the white characters, and so what would be a very patronising sort of silly so in say an Alan Menken score or in a Disney score, whereby they identify with the running ibises and whatever, and all that stuff. And then it has this brilliant line at the end: Africans are African, but I am Africa.
Oh, I see. Right.
Because they've made these converts, suddenly they're like great, like, Lawrence of Arabia or Lawrence of Africa in this case, Lawrence of Uganda. And of course, what you are given to understand in the course of the musical is that the Ugandan people are living extremely difficult but fundamentally unmystical lives, that aren't in any way leavened by the belief that they are somehow one with a great continent of mystery and wonder, all that Joseph Conrad crap, basically.
So the local national politics, it takes them well out of that.
Well, I mean, absolutely. And the poverty, Yeah. And it keeps all of that very, very much in the foreground, which I think is a good thing. Yeah, and in fact, there's one particular character who has a particular medical complaint, which is a motif that crops up at the end of lots of different songs, including the very last one. Again, I won't spoil it, but it's quite graphic.
Oh, right, jolly good.
Yeah.
I think we can work out which area we might be talking about.
Yes,
then.
I think you can.
So that's Mormon, the book of.
Yes. Yes, indeed. And I suppose the only other thing to say about it is that is its depiction of Mormonism, because we haven't actually talked about that.
No.
And its depiction of Mormonism is a good deal less friendly than you'd think. No, hang on. It's a good deal more friendly than you think.
I was going to say, I didn't think it didn't look very friendly at all.
No, that's right. So while absolutely it's satirised and taken the mickey out of, what motivates the character, or the main character in particular, is a desire to apotheosise the religion, or to sort of bring it into the world, and the show asks you to sympathise with that desire. So since it makes that decision, it brings you closer to sort of understanding where Mormons are coming from, as it were.
So they're not portrayed malignantly. So they may be idiots, but they're not.
They're well-intentioned
idiots.
Badly. I mean, that's right. That's basically so that makes them actually quite appealing characters, because they're all sort of young and chipper young fellows, who actually look rather nice and in their nice sort of clean white shirts.
Just there's a whole subgenre about Mormons.
Oh, I know.
In
yes,
all manner of spheres. Yes, absolutely.
And and as a result, you don't hate them for being Mormons. No. You don't. It's not a piece that encourages you to be sort of to loathe people because they have different beliefs, but it does have a little fun on the way.
Well, from an extremely American piece, travelling outside of its continent, to actually a British musical about one of the most fundamentally American
I was going to say,
ever.
yes, the great American novel, or at least when it started.
Or one of the great American novels, which is Moby Dick by Herman Melville.
Moby Dick, as it's known.
Now, Moby Dick is also a musical, known as Moby Dick the Musical. I don't think I can make this plainer for you.
How did they think of that title, I'd like to know?
They
did add an exclamation mark, I'm delighted to say.
Yeah, that's not in the original Victorian book. But it's...
Call me Ishmael!
They make a lot of that in the Moby Dick. Now, let me tell you
probably the only bit of the book they read.
Let me tell you my history with Moby Dick the Musical. My history of Moby Dick musical is I saw an American student version in Edinburgh a few years ago. And whilst the actors put their all into it, I don't think anyone would argue that it was a brilliant piece. I came away thinking, I'm never going to see that again, and my life will in no way be the worse.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've subsequently worked out that there are two reasons why that version didn't work for me, whereas the version I saw only recently in London did.
Right.
And the reason is, first of all, is because how very British it is. And if you don't have that British context and idiom, I suspect coming to it to put it on, you're going to miss quite a lot of what makes it tick and funny. So the American version played it, although it's ostensibly a comic version of a serious story, which is actually, and I'll go on to that again in a minute, but the comic elements, if lost, reduce that down to being a fairly bland interpretation of a serious story.
Right,
because Moby Dick is a serious story. It's a tragedy. It's it's an exploration of madness and disability in some senses, and all manner of bits and pieces. It's not many people come out of it happy. In fact, not many people come out of it. There's only one person survives the Pequot, which is the name of the ship.
Mm.
So, with that missing, and I have to say, so with that missing, you're not getting the whole text as envisaged in the musical.
Right.
And it's an entirely pastiche score, which means you need to have a certain amount of musical sophistication in the performance
to see what they're sort of getting at. Yes.
And you're not going to get that if the entire score is being hammered out on an upright piano, slightly out of tune with not all the keys working. Which sometimes happens in Edinburgh. I saw a version of the Mikado done entirely on that very piano as described, which made it sound like a modern piece. It was so discordant and weird. It was like Gilbert and Sullivan through late 20th century.
For a prepared piano.
Yes.
John Cage, eat your heart out.
It was very odd. So I missed, I think, the two fundamental things of it from that earlier production. I went to see it again in London, where it was on at the Bridewell Theatre, not with great expectations. It's a different musical again.
Indeed, yes.
But
that would be a very long double bill.
But I went to see it, partly actually because a friend of mine was in it, and I went with some friends, and it turned out to be, I'm not going to say brilliant, but it turned out to be highly entertaining, because the two things that were missing from the previous version were now in it. I got the pastiche references.
So you're going to have to say specifically what those are, because I don't think you have yet.
Well, the pastiches?
No, what are the things that are missing? Like, I mean, you mentioned the humour, but what's the gimmick?
The gimmick is the fact that it's set in St Godley's finishing school for girls. In fact, if you've seen the stage play, the comedy stage play, Daisy Pulls It Off, you've got pretty much what this is about.
Right.
It's about a school a girls' school, which is very much in the style of St Trinian's. They're all absolutely rotters.
Yeah.
You know, they're sexual girls, which of course in the current climate in the country might make it a bit odd. But there you go. They're all sort of 16, 17-year-old schoolgirls, who will say for safety, and they smoke and they drink, and they're terrors basically.
Yes.
And they've got an equally incompetent headmistress who is a man dressed as a woman, straight out of Alastair Sim and the St Trinian's films. Mm-hmm. It's an old British tradition of dragging up.
Yes.
Straight from pantomime and a whole lot of other things. Anyway, the plot is, at the beginning, the school is about to go bankrupt. And so in order to... And now, this may not make a great deal of sense, but in order to stop them going bankrupt, they decide to put on the musical version of Moby Dick, which one of the girls has been writing...
Right.
With an expectation that it will make pots of cash. Now,
see where they're going.
I don't want to ruin this for anyone, but they succeed. So it's all it's all very happy. But then, but of course, because they don't have much cash, they have to put it on in the school swimming pool.
Yes.
Using the props which they improvise out of what's in the school. So Captain Ahab, played by the headmistress, who's already a man but dressed as a woman, now then dressed as a man again, hasn't got a peg leg. Is wearing a cricket pad on one leg to suggest that leg is missing.
Yes.
And there's lots of this kind of thing. School desks are moved around, school screens are moved around, and it's done absolutely full-on, tongue-in-cheek, send-up British...
I was going to say, is this basically what we know as course acting? In this kind of, yeah, okay.
And very, very heightened sense of silliness. You know, it really... It's what's odd about it, actually, is its strength and its weakness is the fact that the story is such a miserable one. And so occasionally you get these songs and performances and scenes where actually they play it fairly straight, because there is you can't send it up all the way through.
No.
You've got to give it a little bit of heart, or sincerity at least. And so they do that. And so occasionally you get these odd oases of, I use oasis as though it's a good thing, but these little moments of sincerity where actually the reality and the tragedy comes through, but then it's immediately undercut by the way it's staged or the performance. So, for example, in the second act, they meet the I think it's the SS Denise or something like that. Anyway, it's a British ship that's also whaling on the same seas where the Pequot is looking for Moby Dick.
Yeah.
And the British captain of this British ship has lost his 12-year-old son in a accident, and is basically searching around for his son and his crew. So it's a very sad story. But it's done, in this case, by one of the girls coming on dressed in a naval blazer and hat, with a ship made out of cardboard round their waist, held up by red braces. And of course, onto the pastiche part, to prove that he's British, his song is entirely GNS, and suddenly, he sings his sad story, which then suddenly becomes a light-hearted chorus, and then all the crew members of the Pequot join in with that Gilbert and Sullivan style repeat of the thing you've just heard. Yeah. So you've got it in the pastiche, and you've got this high send up all the way through.
Yes, okay.
And several of the girls in the cast were also boys dressed as girls.
Yes,
some remarkably good legs on some of those fellas, it must be said. Not in all cases.
No.
But so you've got this what you would say is, you wouldn't say music hall, but you would say it owes something to the vulgarity and fullness of a performance you might see in a music hall.
I'm just looking at the programme here, and these girls have names such as Camilla Wintercheeks, Fifi Plunkett Boggs, Deirdre Gizzard Leaks, and my personal favourite, Emily Sprinklywater.
That's right, yes. They're all, because it's supposed to be a preparatory school for girls, they're all supposed to be posh, even though they're dreadful. So you've got this very full-on... And I think the definition, I would say, of it, actually, is the fact that it's actually a serious play undercut by absolutely silly performance and interpretation. Yeah. And that is a very interesting balancing act to pull off for two acts.
It's sort
but
of
they succeed.
I'm just looking at the list of the
songs.
The songs in it, yes, exactly. And noticing that what that suggests to me is that they get quite quickly into the telling of Moby Dick. Is this right?
They do, yes, absolutely.
And then
within about 10 minutes.
So the framing story isn't necessarily in the foreground for a lot of it. Is that right? And it reminds me in that respect of 40 Years On by Alan Bennett, whereby you get... the school is set up, and it's going to be a school play, but most of what you see is the school play, not the people. Yeah. For example, like in High School Musical, where most of it's about putting on the musical rather than about seeing the musical itself.
Oh, that's right. The school bankruptcy is merely a jumping-off point.
Yes.
And then you get into 90% of the story, which is Moby Dick.
The course acting version of Moby Dick.
That's right. And I enjoyed it a great deal. It was done, the group I saw doing it, centre stage, are very adept at doing this kind of thing and are no strangers to silliness. So it was a full-on performance, and when it needed to be heightened, it was certainly heightened. It was full of originality. Moby Dick was realised with white umbrellas.
Yes,
so
okay.
lots of the cast took umbrellas, and then they were able to form this, one person at the back holding two fins for the tail,
Yeah.
and then everyone else formed this sort of hump, an igloo almost, of white umbrellas with two had black discs at the front to make the eyes, and that allowed them to have Moby Dick actually realised on stage. So it was lots of clever stagecraft as well. So you had that, and that, as I say, that very fine line between seriousness and comedy.
Yes.
And then you had the pastiche score. So very early on, when they're in Nantucket, which is where all the whaling takes place, or
Yes.
where the land, before they all go off, all the sailors live. It's straight out of Sweeney Todd. In fact, there's a couple of musical phrases lifted from Sweeney Todd. So, it shows you it's pastiche early on. Some of it is pastiche of musical theatre, as I said. There's a Gilbert and Sullivan number, which is The Rachel, sung by their captain. And then we've got odd genre pastiches. So there's a 50s number where everyone's doo-wopping away in the background.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it absolutely, you can fit the lyrics to It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want to
Right.
some of it, whilst at the same time being also able to fit the Shoop Shoop song to it. So it's
Oh,
a very
okay.
odd fusion. But those two songs are absolutely 50s, 60s kind of.
Yes.
You get the idea. So there's... and the people I was with came out in the interview and said, "Do you know, they said, I feel like I've just had a slice of Les Miserables." They said. So there's an awful lot of that kind of stuff. The what you might
Would
call
that be
the
Building
80s,
America or a
80s warbling. Can't actually remember the songs from their titles.
Okay.
So. But it was a full-on pastiche score all the way through. Some of the numbers were done with amazing flamboyance. A man happens to a woman,
Right.
which is Esther, who's Captain Ahab's wife, waiting for him to come back from his 3-year journey at sea, only to discover that not only his leg but his other parts have been taken by the whale and then commit suicide. But beforehand, she's as lascivious as I've seen on stage. And of course, so you've got this sort of 16-year-old schoolgirl, ostensibly, coming on doing this slinky dance with the head teacher looking on a little bit askance. And then the head teacher has to come on as Ahab and respond to it.
Yeah.
And yet, at the same time, you've also got enough seriousness in it, because I've not read Moby Dick. I've seen the film.
You've not read Moby Dick?
Oh, I have not read Moby Dick.
Neither have I.
Yes, I've seen the film with Gregory Peck.
Right.
So I'm familiar with the story. But actually, do you know, as a younger man, I always just took it for granted that the whale had, for whatever reason, eaten his leg.
Right.
I hadn't realised it's actually an investigation, and or at least with a subtext of impotence.
Oh, I see.
So in fact, it's about not being a man or being emasculated.
Not
in
in
a very
fact having a leg to get over.
yeah, indeed, yeah, a very genuine form of emasculation.
Yes.
And I'm afraid, oddly, this absolutely over-the-top, silly, stupid, funny pastiche version has also at the same time opened up the book as a much more interesting story than I thought.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because
Don't want to.
I remember when this was first came out in the West End, which is a Cameron Mackintosh thing. Apropos of which, I've just noticed the compulsory credits that you have to have in your programme if you do a production for it. It says here, it's by Robert Longdon and Hereward Kay and music arranged by Martin Koch. It says, the authors would like to reluctantly acknowledge interference from Russell Ashoki and Cameron Mackintosh.
And yet...
I don't know if that's tongue-in-cheek or not, to be honest, because Cameron Mackintosh was the guy who presented it. And I remember seeing the marketing at the time and being a bit puzzled by the fact that you had this sort of schoolgirl's sort of school
uniform
tie, and what had that got to do with Moby Dick? Because I knew that was about a whale. And I don't think they ever really made that clear for most people anyway. No. And the show failed in London in a very big way. So that was kind of interesting.
Well, the history is it started in 92 when Cameron Mackintosh, I think it was the Oxford Playhouse, he just helped refurbish that and was looking for a show to start it. He'd been sent on spec the score for this, Moby Dick, by the two original authors, and he rather took to it. So he gave them, I think, a mere £25,000, which in 92 was still not a lot for a show, but you could do something with it. And they did. They put on the Moby Dick, and it was a big hit there. But it's a small, intimate theatre. Yes. And he then made the mistake of Cameron Mackintosh
that might translate to the West End.
And so he put it on a big cavernous theatre in London.
Prince Edward, I think it was, actually.
It's not one of the biggest, but I don't know.
That is one of the bigger ones.
Is it? Oh, right. Anyway, certainly it was far too big for the show.
Yes.
And as you say, and the picture failed completely.
Yes.
It certainly failed, very big time.
But also,
did you know the latest news?
No.
Cameron Mackintosh has this very year said he is looking to bring it back to London. He thinks he has unfinished business with Moby Dick.
He thinks he can do something with it.
He does.
I do think there's an expectations thing around it, because like if someone says Moby Dick the musical, you know, what you expect from that is a fairly straight attempt to do the show. And of course this is a completely different and aimed at an entirely different sort of audience who, well, I don't know who on earth would go and see Moby Dick the musical as a straight rendition anyway.
No.
So it probably is aimed at the right audience. The question is, do they know what they're up for or what they're getting?
It's very clearly aimed, and you can see that from the original writing, I think, all the way through to now, that it wants a slice of Rocky Horror.
Yes.
That is the audience it's sort of going for. You've even got the drag. Although not quite so exotic or erotic.
It seems to the sort of sensibility that you've described, as you quite rightly say, is the Centrinians and Daisy pulls it off. It sort of predates Rocky Horror, doesn't it? It's a more light treatment of sort of traditional English themes and, you know, that sort of thing, which is all coming back these days.
It's Seaside and Panto and Donald McGill postcards.
Yes, it's that sort of area, exactly. Which is a very long tradition. So,
but I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it this time, to the point where I would see it again. Whereas, ironically, last time I didn't think I'd go and see it again, and yet I did.
So, are there particular standout songs in the score, or is it?
No.
Or is that not the selling point?
That's not the selling point. I mean, if you like modern musicals, then, you know, there's enough of modern musicals in there. They're all, for the most part, the pastiches tend towards modern pastiches. You know, you can't say, oh look, there's the Gershwin number. You can't say, oh look, there's the Cole Porter number. You've got Gilbert and Sullivan, because Gilbert and Sullivan always represent Britishness. So the one British character in this ironically British adaptation is given Gilbert and Sullivan, exactly the same way, by the way, as Stephen Sondheim does it in Pacific Overtures, and has been done a million other times.
Yes.
And as I say, it's each number is in it's the way it's produced that makes the song a success. So, for example, the Esther singing her song "A Man Happens to a Woman." Is so, if it's done well as it was on this occasion, so you walk away with that number just because it's the performance more than the song itself.
Quality of the lyrics?
Adequate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, forgive me, if they're spoofing modern musicals, then the quality of modern musicals isn't, in my book, as you know, all that.
Yes.
So I couldn't place all the shows, and I'm not a fan of Les Miserables, so I know the kind of sort of whiny warbling that you get from Les Miserables, so I spotted that several times.
Yes.
But I wouldn't be able to say whether it was a fair spoof of the lyrics of it.
Yes, an interesting area. Well, I look forward to seeing my first school production of this at some point. Probably.
Well, as I say, if Cameron has his way, we
may yet see it in the West End. Well, I'd be interested to see they make that concept work. I can see what would appeal to anybody about that concept. It's just whether it has that audience.
Yeah. Well, of the three shows that we've discussed today, actually, we've been very positive about all three.
Yes.
So I think our final conclusion is don't dial M for Med.
That's true. Yes, clearly musicals that have an M in them are probably good, I expect.
Well, that must be true for all of them. Actually,
which means The King and I is rubbish.
I agree with that.
Yeah, there you go, see?
It's Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Sound of Music, good. Well, okay, Mary Poppins,
absolutely.
great, you know.
I'm
not going to be satisfied until we've analysed every title of every musical.
That begins with an M.
Stay with us, listeners.
For 4 years.
Yeah.
Two final musical facts which have M's in them that are related to nothing, but I'm just going to add them in because they're so marvellous. Yeah. Do you know the fame...
Floyd Collins doesn't have an M in it. Sorry. The theory's fallen down.
Do you know the song La Mer, the sea?
I'm not sure.
It's been famously sung by Robbie Williams and Bobby Darin, but it's actually a Charles Trenet whose centenary.
How does it go?
Year. La mer.
It's known as Beyond. Yes,
It's Beyond the Sea. Isn't
Beyond
it?
the Sea.
Yes, absolutely. It's originally called La Mer.
Right.
It was sung famously by Charles Trenet, whose centenary is this year. It begins with M.
It does.
It is his biggest hit, and it's one of the biggest hits of the French music scene of the 20th century, actually, it turns out, in sheet music sales and records and things like that, and the fact it's still recorded today. You know, it's a big hit. Begins with M, which is why it's in this programme.
Yes.
When Charles Trenet had the idea, he was travelling on a French train, and he didn't have any paper, so he went to the lavatory.
Oh, goodness.
And he wrote the lyrics on loo paper from the French railway system. History does not relate whether it was the soft paper of later years or the hard paper that was likely to have been more available in the 30s.
I have to say, this is a very far cry from Joseph Smith's golden plates of, on which were inscribed the words of God, as handed to him by the angel Moroni, but there we are.
And one other song. Now, if I said John Philip Sousa to you, what would you think of?
I think you'd said Sousa wrong.
Yes.
Well, I would think of the Liberty Bell and Blaze Away and all
Marches. Military
basically.
marches.
Military, and the sousaphone, which of course was the famous double B
You
flat
mean the
bass.
sousaphone?
The sousaphone.
Did you know?
It's a Native American invention, actually.
But at his time of fame, when he was writing, he actually was famous for being the American Sullivan. He was actually famous for writing operetta and musical theatres at the first half of the the first few years of the 20th century. But one of his famous marches is the Marine's Hymn, which is probably better known as From the Halls of Montezuma. Do you know it? From the halls of Montezuma, da 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 da.
Oh yes, yes.
And people say another Sousa march.
Yes.
And it would have been if it weren't for the fact it's a rip-off of Offenbach.
Oh.
Offenbach wrote an operetta in the middle of the 19th century. I think it's 1862 or 3, something like that,
right.
around there, which was called Genevieve, believe it or not.
150 years old. This.
Yeah, one of the best. One of this song is one of the most translated songs into English from his oeuvre. Particularly, it was translated into English as soon as 1868, so quite quickly.
Yeah.
And it's known as the Bold Gendarme. It's about these two policemen. You may know it. About these two policemen who are basically they let criminals get away if there's any money in it, or they're likely to be bashed up. But they'll impound.
How different from the practices of our current.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, but this is a trope of the stupid comedy corrupt policeman that still exists. But whereas they will happily arrest anyone who's not going to cause them any trouble. We'll run them in. We'll run them in. That's the chorus.
Okay.
And the opening verse is da da dun 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 da da da. Now, Offenbach travelled to America in 1878 on a tour, and he worked with Sousa, who then was a violinist. And then Sousa went off and wrote lots of operetta, from which he liberally borrowed. He was known as a pasticher in the same way Sullivan was.
Yes.
But he liberally borrowed. And so one of the famous American marches, the Marine's Hymn, is straight from French French opera.
And did Offenbach threaten to sue him at all?
Sue him? No, I think he was dead by then. So,
well.
With that issue.
Yes.
But anyway, so there we are. I wanted to just mention the Marine's Hymn as it begins with M.
Yes.
And talk about John Philip Sousa.
No, that's true. And could we talk about Montezuma while we're here?
He ate a puma, you know.
Did he?
Yes.
How lovely. Did it take its revenge later
on?
I
imagine it probably did. Well, I think we've covered the letter M. Yes. Remember, this has been a children's television workshop production. And next week we'll be looking at the number 12.
Yes, we should.
Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm now off to push a waiter down some steps whilst holding cakes.
How splendid.
And you're going to be talking about agua.
Agua, yes. Why?
That's what Sesame Street
agua,
showed
that's
every
right,
week.
Yes, that's true. That was the count.
I've only know one word in Spanish, and it's thanks to Sesame Street.
Cerrado, abierto, cerrado.
What's that?
Abierto, cerrado. Open and closed in Spanish.
Oh, is it?
Which I learned from an extended Sesame Street sketch that did exactly that. Neither of them begin with M. We're going off the topic.
Yeah, but however, Cookie Monster also taught you many other things that you carry through life.
Indeed.
Well, I think we might be digressing. Tim, it's been lovely talking to you about the letter M.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much indeed.
And for me too. It's been lovely talking about me too, though.
Yes. And I look forward to speaking to you again another time. But until that time, stay alive.
Thanks.
This episode of Musical Talk was presented by Tim Sayward and Thos Ribbits and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2013. And why not go along to our website and listen to previous episodes at www.musicaltalk.co.uk. And now, oh dear, outtalks.
I think you could probably watch this twice, but that's probably where I would draw the line.
It's not full of infinitely
it doesn't,
deep moments.
In the same way as Jerry Springer and in the same way as Avenue Q, there is a final pulling of the punch. There really is. And even in Jerry Springer, it amounts to a sort of slightly hand-wavy, liberal sort of, there's no such thing as good and evil sort of thing, so hooray for everybody, I think.
So the last 90 minutes has been rendered pointless. Thank you.
Sort of thing, yeah. Where you get these it's basically a two groups musical. I hope you're going to cut that down a little bit. Sorry.
Well, the ums and ahs.
Yes,
I was
indeed.
definitely thinking, they go straight to the outtalks.
Yes, exactly. Right. Once again, what was the question? Start from that.